All right, sir. First question I had was, we need to start your career. How did you get into SP?
Well, I finished a master's degree at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they asked what assignment you would like. And at that point, I said, gee, I think I'd like to get into missiles. And so they put me in missiles. It was the SNARC missile, which was airborne. It was intercontinental, however, and we only built 6 of them. They were located up at Presque Isle, Maine, and they were city busters. It was a good system. It used stars to navigate and flew at about Mach 0.8 and carried a 10 megaton warhead. When the ballistic missiles came in, the system was put to bed. Bill King, who was a former director of special projects, was the program manager. He was a lieutenant colonel. So that was the first time I met Bill King, and it was an inspiring meeting because Bill was a great guy. He knew how to run a program. He gave people the job, and he let them do it. And he let them go off and improvise if you had to. So I owe a great deal to Bill. And after a 4 or 5 year tour at Wright-Patterson, I went to command and staff down in Montgomery, Alabama. Actually, it was the Staff College at Montgomery.
Well, what was your first job in SP, General?
When I was finishing the school in Montgomery, I was assigned to be a teacher at command and staff, and I just about cried. I mean, I couldn't think of anything worse. And I remember Bill King having told me that when he visited me once at Wright-Patterson, that he was out on the West Coast. He couldn't tell me what he was doing. He said, but it is really interesting and fun. You'd love it. And if you want to come out here and try it, give me a call. So guess what I did? I gave him a call. And magically, somebody must have had a lot of priority, because my assignment as a teacher to the Staff College was canceled. And I was assigned to a civilian street address out here on the West Coast. And that's how I ended up in SP.
In our blood,
yeah. At first, because of, with the SNARC, I had been responsible for launches and a few other things. And because I had worked with the electronic reconnaissance in SAC, right, they assigned me to SP8 here at Special Projects. And security was tight, and clearances were hard to get. Now, in SAC, I had a top secret clearance with certain caveats, but I had to wait about 6 months to get a clearance to know what was going on at SP. So I was sort of isolated out in a corner, and they gave me a job of monitoring some Thor launches. The Thors were being launched for a Navy project, and that was very interesting. And I had to learn about the Thor, which was good. And I remember one night actually, I was sort of on night watch, and the Thor was processed similar to the way the Soviets processed their missiles. It laid flat, and you did all your processing flat, and then they moved it up to a vertical position and out to the pad. So it was laying there flat, and I was looking at the back of the missile, and it looked like some of the wires were laying right up next to an expansion chamber on the rocket. And we'd had problems with second burns with the bird. And the second burns were required because once you get into space, the fuel sort of floated around in the tanks. And when you tried to start it for a second burn, you didn't have fuel. So what they did is they had a small burn that gave ullages and pulled all the fuel back so that you could light it and have fuel to burn. But we found out that that wire was being burnt out by the heat of the expansion nozzle, and that's why we were having the problem. So I guess as far as space is concerned, I made one real technical contribution. During the time, after I got my clearances, and I was working with Lockheed, and there was a couple very good Lockheed people. George Minoga and Vince Hendry were two of them, and we were talking, and they had an idea for a sub-satellite. They said the Agena had extra capability, and we ought to be able to use that extra capability. And they came up with a scheme that on the back of the Agena, where there's a little hole, that you could put a satellite that was about that big, by that big, and maybe that fat. And there was a colonel, lieutenant colonel, in SP that I talked to about that, because he was making small packages that were being kicked off independently. His name was John Copley. And so John and I got together and said, hey, if we can build this little satellite, we can put some of John's packages on the satellite, kick them off, change orbits, and we'd have an independent satellite. I took the suggestion up to General Greer's office. I was scared to death. I almost peed in my pants. He got me up there on the blackboard, and for about 2.5 hours he grilled me. Now, General Greer was an engineer, and he knew what was going on. And he went up side and across and up and everything else, and we finished, and he said, Jack, you've got a program and you got $2 million to do it. And that was it. I was a program manager. And we built the P-11. It then became later the 989 and lasted for maybe 20 or 30 years as a 989. 64, 65, that time period.
And from that effort down at SBH, what was your next job?
Again, General Greer came in and talked to me. He said, I'm moving you. And I said, first of all, he's moving me. What I do wrong? Why am I getting moved? And he said, we've got a program over there that we've been operating, and the program manager is leaving. I want to make you system director. And that was the DMSP. At that time, it was 417, and it was a black program. And my charter was pretty simple. It was, number one, take it from being black to gray. And number two was to provide direct support to the fighting forces in Vietnam. And so I became a systems program director instead of just a program manager.
Did you want to talk about your team that you had there?
Oh, yeah. We had Tom Haig had started the program, and he had taken the basic Tyros program, which was launched in '60 and only worked about 4 years. But the Tyros was spin stabilized, and the axis of the Tyros was parallel to the axis of the Earth. So when it went around like this. The bird spinning, you don't get good pictures. You get all sorts of strange pictures. As a matter of fact, I've got a copy. You won't be able to see it much because we don't have a view graph here. But this is the first Tyros picture taken April 1st, 1960. And you see, it shows the Earth and everything, but it wouldn't be worth anything. You couldn't do anything with it. So Tom and his crew did really two simple changes. First of all, rather than spinning with the axis parallel to the Earth's axis, he turned it around so that it was going around the Earth like a wheel, spinning like a wheel. Then he put a temperature sensor on it so that as it spun and touched the surface of the Earth, you'd have a transition from space cold to hot Earth. And when it came out the other side, you went hot Earth to cold space. The next time around, he cut that time in half so that as the bird triggered half the way down, he took a picture. And lo and behold, it was a picture looking straight down, and you could not only see the clouds, you could tell where they were. You could actually locate them precisely. And so that was block 1 and 2 of DMSP. Block 3, and the reason I was brought in there, they wanted to go into Vietnam because we thought we could really do a job in Vietnam. Now, Tom had set up a relationship with SAC, and SAC had opened 2 sites, one in Loring, Maine, and the other in Fairchild, Washington, and they were the 2 operating sites. And they brought the weather down to Global Weather Central in Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska. That was the system. So what we did was we decided we'd take a picture and directly, when we took the picture, broadcast it down directly to a ground station on the ground. At the same time, we would record it. When it came around the Earth, we'd dump it at one of the stations so it could be used at Global Weather Central also. And that was kind of a simple change. One other, the original had 1 camera, so it had a limited view. We put 3 cameras on it, 1 straight down and 2 out to the horizon. So we got horizon to horizon weather pictures. And within about 2 weeks, the word I got, within about 2 weeks, there wasn't any missions flown north that weren't flown until they got that weather picture to see what was clear. Because before that, they would send bombers up to the north and everything was cloud covered. They couldn't see where they were dropping. They'd go out over the ocean and dump their ordnance and then come back. So this gave them perfect weather, and at the same time back into the United States. So that was the Block 3. Block 4 was just a simple technical improvement. They went from a small 1/2-inch Vidicon to a 1-inch Vidicon, just better resolution and everything. But Block 5 also started, and that was a major advancement in not only weather, but in all satellite technology. It was a line scan system, and it was a brainchild of an Air Force major, Major Jim Blankenship. Now, Jim was a weatherman, but he was brilliant. He had 2 PhDs and a couple master's degrees. He was not a manager of people or organizations, but technically he was superb. And he designed the whole block system, the line scan and everything else. Now, what were we going to do with it? I had a young guy who was also in the SPO, who was a pilot. And at that time, Space Division had airplanes, and they had T-39s. And his name was Nick Chubb. He later became a lieutenant general and ran ESD, but at the time he was a captain working for us. And so we commandeered a T-39, modified it, and built in a small aerospace laboratory with 2 aerospace technicians one of the fellows' names was Rudy I don't remember, Rudy Marowinski or something like that. But the unit was about that big, and about that thick. And they hung it underneath the T-39, cut a hole through the pressure chamber, put lead acid batteries in the T-39 to run the thing, and we ran it up and down the coast. And we used a simple television type of processing, and the pictures were amazing. Nobody had ever seen pictures like that. We got approval for the whole block system, Block 5 system, in about 3 months. All the money we needed, and we built it. Now, we're still flying Block 5. I think Block 5, A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever, G, somebody probably knows what model they're up to. But we're gone on that. The whole team was great. I can talk a lot about many of the people. Paul Freeman was a captain that was a tiger. When we were having trouble with organizations or anything, we'd send Paul out. And it didn't matter if he was a captain and there was some colonel that was objecting, he would fight the battle and win it. As I mentioned before, we had Nick Chubb, who later became a lieutenant general. We had Bob Wickwire, who's in the audience here, and Bob was key. Our finance, security, administration, everything was one man. It was Byron Lane. And and we had 6 people from SAC. SAC ran the ground stations and the launch crew. So, let's see.
Now, General, since it was a great program, you had multiple bosses in that case?
Oh, yeah, I had multiple bosses, and one would think that that could be a nightmare, and I guess it could be, depending. I had first of all, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, who was the DNRO, since it had been his program, still had his finger on it. That was Alexander Falax. And I'm looking for the names of the others. Oh, yeah. The commander of Systems Command had gotten involved. That was General Ferguson. So I had 2 Washington bosses. Then back here, General Martin was head of SAFSP, and he was still my boss. And General O'Neill was commander of Systems Command. So I had all this power as bosses. Well, they each thought the other one was running it. So guess who ran it? I mean, that was the most fun job anybody could have. You did whatever you want, and you told them whatever you want. You know, and the results were, because of the team, it was just absolutely fantastic.
Now, didn't at one point in the 417 time, General Martin give you some?
Yeah, I had a problem, and I went in and I was going to set up a committee to look at the problem. And he looked at me like I had a hole in my head, and he said, you know, nothing ever comes out with a committee. You set up a committee, you're not going to get any results. You know, you do it yourself, and let's see. I'm trying to remember his quote exactly.
I don't think we got it.
No, I don't think I have it in here. But in any event, he said, you know, don't rely on the committee. Go ahead and do it. And don't ask for help, because you might get it.
Now, how long did you stay with 417?
Oh, I left 417 in 69. And 68 I left, and I went to a war college, National War College, interesting place, only 140 students, 35 from the Air Force, 35 from, all full colonels, 35 from the Army. 35 from the Marines and the Navy combined, and then 35 civilians from state, treasury, and the various other organizations. So it was a very elite group, and I was very fortunate to be assigned. I went to the National War College. During the course, or the term, lasted from July to June. And about halfway through, a little past halfway through, around January or February, I got a call from General Ferguson's office, and he was a systems command, which is Andrews, about an hour's drive from National War College. He wanted to see me. So I called the secretary, made an appointment, and went over there and walked in and talked to him a while. And he asked me, would you like to be, no. Well, he asked me, first of all, whether I knew anything about the avionics lab. I said, no, not really, sir. I don't know very much about it. He said, how would you like to be commander of the avionics lab? And right there, it sort of took me back. I said, well, sir, it would be an honor, and I'd love to do it, but I have to tell you, I've never been in a laboratory in my life. I'd probably run it the way I ran my program. He said, that's why I'm talking to you. So as I was walking out, he said, oh, by the way, get Myrtle, who was his secretary, to give you a copy of the last IG report. Whoop. Now I knew what it was about. Continuing on that story just a little bit, the IG report was kind of bad. And when I got in there, I knew it wouldn't be very much time before they'd be on my back again. We had 4 divisions, and the best division was electronic warfare. By far, they were the best. So we spruced them up. We really got them looking real good. And then I called the IG. Now, nobody ever calls the IG and asks for an inspection. That's almost like asking to be shot. But I called them and I said I'd like them to look at my electronic warfare division, the best one we had. And they came in, and the IG report wasn't perfect, but it was good. It was more than passing. And I didn't see an IG again for the rest of the time I was commander. So I got him off my back. Where are we going, Dave?
So you want to talk about some of the jobs that Avionics Lab had there, including uniforms?
Oh, no, that wasn't in the
Oh, I'm
avionics
sorry,
lab.
that's
Yeah, about halfway through the tour there, about two and a half years into being commander, they moved me over to run all of engineering at Aeronautical Systems Division. That was not a good job, but it was a brigadier general slot. So a colonel getting into a general slot is you take it and look at it. But it was a management job, really. You had an organization the size of aerospace. You had a couple thousand people, and doing all sorts of things. From engines to electronics to whatever. One of the organizations we had was uniforms. And of course, they were responsible for designing flight uniforms and for high altitudes and pressure suits and things like that. But the interesting point, they also made people's uniforms, dress uniforms, and lady uniforms. And we had a brigadier general lady in Washington that it made her whole life to come down and help us design the ladies' uniforms. And I'll tell you, that was a touchy road to walk. Let's see, what else we have, Dave?
I think it's time to move on to the NRO staff.
Oh, yeah. I got moved from there to the NRO staff. I stayed deputy to Dave Bradburn for a few months, about 5 or 6 months, something like that, and then took over the staff. And at the time, that was in June of '73 that I became director of the NRO staff. And John McLucas was the undersecretary of the Air Force and also the DNRO at the time.
Well, what was that staff like at that time?
Well, it was small, very small. I mean, compared to what is in Chantilly now, probably the size of one of the smaller organization units. I think we had about 35 people on the staff, not counting a group of people who were in the basement who were assigned to the staff, but they were operationally tasking satellites. They were down in the basement of the Pentagon. They would get requirements in for coverage of this area. We'd like to get a picture here. We'd like to do that. And they would have the satellite passes, and they would assign certain passes that we would take pictures. They would pass that to Sunnyvale, and then at Sunnyvale, we would task the satellites and take the pictures and send them back. So the staff was small, very hard hitting. It was located on the C ring of the 4th floor, and it was 4C1000, and just a little area there. As I said, we had about 35 people, and across the hall, our whole fiscal department, which amounted to 3 people, a secretary, a major, and John Holleran, who was the controller. And that ran the NRO. It ran the NRO at that time. What do you think?
Yeah, and now there was Bob Naka in the position of the deputy there.
Well, the organization NRO was going through a lot of changes at the time. And it was a tug of war between the CIA and the Department of Defense. And so, as kind of a compromise, the deputy director of the NRO was a CIA man. He was Bob Naka. Actually, as far as operations and everything, he didn't get involved very much. He was primarily a reporter that reported back. We'd have a staff meeting or something, and I know Bob would run into his office and he was on the phone immediately talking to Langley.
Now, at the time you were there, we still had Program D in the NRO, right?
Yeah, we had 4 programs. Program A was out here, Secretary of the Air Force Special Projects. Program B was a CIA program, OD&E, Office of Development and Engineering, was just a name that didn't mean anything. Program C was the Navy, and the Navy was not too much involved in most of the stuff. They were interested in supporting the naval operations, and they had were running some systems that did that very well. And then we had Program D, which were all the airplanes, the SR-71s, the U-2, Oxcart, and all the rest of them. But during the time I was there, the powers that be decided to move the airplanes over to the Air Force. And so as staff director, I had the job of making the arrangements and you know, all the details of getting the program moved from the NRO over to the Air Force. And that worked very well because the NRO was ready to get rid of them and the Air Force really wanted it. So, you know, it was.
What's the time frame?
That was in the early 70s, probably 73. Let's see if we got anything else.
And with Program D, you had the job of coordinating those flights across the U.S. government?
Yeah. We were still stinging from Gary Powers and the U-2. And we were very worried about what could happen. So that all flights that were First of all, we were not allowed to fly over denied territory. If it was a combat zone, like, say, Korea or Vietnam, and it was combat, you could fly over it. But you couldn't fly over denied territory, which is Soviet Union and China and maybe some other places. So any flight, a reconnaissance flight or any other type of flight that was in the area of a denied territory, we had to get special approval. And as staff director, that fell on me, and I had to get all the elements of the Pentagon had to be notified, and the White House had to be notified, Congress had to be notified, State Department had to know, there was a whole list. And some of them we could do by telephone, some of them took personal effort to go over and see the people and notify them. And we had to get the approval before we flew any of those flights.
Now, one of the other tasks you had here that fascinates me is XCOM stuff.
Oh, yeah. The NRO, actually, I thought it was a good way of working things. We had the 4 programs, and they needed some sort of cohesion because there was still conflict between the CIA and the Department of Defense. So it was run by an executive committee, an XCOM, and the Deputy Secretary of Defense was on it, the Director of CIA was on it, and a representative from the President's office, usually the President's Science Advisor. And that was the XCOM. And they met as required or about quarterly. And John McLucas was the director of the NRO, also Secretary of the Air Force. And so he would come in and give presentations, but he would bring me also to give some of the presentations. Also, I ended up being secretary, kind of secretary to the XCOM. Not really. No editorial comments or anything else. My directions were very clear that we would not even list items that are talked about, but any significant discussion was just that we discussed that, and any decisions, any action items, particularly decisions and action items, and they were really just bullets. And so I would prepare the minutes, if they're called minutes. John McLucas would look at them and say, okay, and then I'd take them around to each of the members of the XCOM to get their signature and then give them to Deputy Secretary of Defense. But even though there was all this control, it was interesting. I was Brigadier General, that it was a little bit of power because I wrote what was there. You know, and when you write something, you can change the flavor just a little bit, and not a whole lot, but a little bit.
All right, sir. Now, the liaisons with Congress at that time.
Oh, yeah. Well, this was quick because the liaison was quick. It amounted to once every 6 months, 2 briefings. One to the head of the House Permanent Committee on Intelligence, the HPSI, and the other one to the Senate Committee on Intelligence. And we only talk to the chairman and in his office. And we bring these elephant cases because it was still paper charts. You know, we'd use the paper charts. And we'd usually get about maybe an hour and a half time with the guy. We didn't want more than that. You didn't want to give him too much information because the senator or representative usually didn't understand it anyway. So John would get in and talk about the whole program, you know, some politics, where we're headed and all that. Then John Holleran would give about 10 to 15 minutes on the finances, and he'd go through all the finances real quick. Nobody could understand it, really. I mean, you just get a quick picture unless you had the numbers. We didn't leave the numbers. And then I would talk for about 30 minutes on the gee whiz. I had the easy job, showing pictures, and we got this, and we got this intelligence, and this how it fits. You know, that was the fun part. And by the time we finished, the congressman or the senator was, ooh, that's worth all the money we're paying for. You know, you're getting all that. So yeah, that was our liaison with Congress compared to what's now. I mean, it was simple.
Yeah, okay. And there were some unusual events during your tenure there on the staff?
Yeah, there were a few. One was the Skylab. It was a NASA program, and it was supposed to put some people up in the laboratory for a while. And on the launch, there was some severe damage. A micromedia shield was damaged. One of the solar arrays and the other solar array was stuck. And they were going to try to send a mission up to fix it. But they weren't sure exactly what the problem is and how to fix it. What happened that we had a gambit up there, and when this happened, it was a weekend that we found out that on a Sunday we had a conjunction that we were only going to be about 7 miles from the Skylab. Now that sounds a long long distance, but the gambit could take a picture from 100 miles and you could see a golf ball. So, you know, that was pretty easy. We took the picture. I mean, everybody approved the picture. But we only had about a quarter of our film taken. So we had 3/4 of we had 2 buckets at that time to bring down, and we only had about a quarter taken. That meant that all that film, thousands of feet of film, we were, you know, if we brought a bucket down, it couldn't happen. So John McLucas sent me around, you know, find the DepSec dep. Nobody couldn't get to talk to him. Trying this DCI. No, everybody. Nobody was available. They knew what it was, but they were hiding. And I really couldn't find them. And I remember a Sunday morning going in, John was having breakfast, and I came in and said, Dr. Malukas, you know, I'm sorry I failed. I haven't been able to talk to anybody. There are none available. He said, I'm not surprised. And I said, and we have to make a decision to drop that bucket and recover it this afternoon. Because if we don't, we lose the opportunity. And so he struck his head, and he, you know, this was a big decision. He was going to lose thousands of feet of film untaken. He asked me a few questions about it, and I guess I recommended. I said, you know, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I said, I think I'd go ahead and recover the bucket. He said, go ahead and do it, but keep me informed. And we got the bucket back. They processed the film, and the pictures actually helped NASA. We showed them the pictures, and they were able to put the right equipment together to take up there to make the fix. And it fixed Skylab.
And there was an incident with Tom Reed.
Oh, well, towards the end of my stay as the director of the staff, John McLucas became Secretary of the Air Force. And the difference between being Undersecretary and head of the NRO and being Secretary and the head of the NRO was a lot. I mean, his time was really taken up. I had trouble getting in to see him. So I had once a week a few hours scheduled to come in and brief him. The rest of the time, pretty much operated on my own. Then he left and Tom Reed came in, didn't know a thing about space or anything else, but he was titled the NRO. So somebody had to run it, and I guess I wasn't bashful.
And how big was the program at that time?
we were just under, in those years' dollars, just under $1 billion, which would be about a little over 5 right now, about 5.5 maybe, which is smaller than the current program. I don't know what the current program is, and so, but I think it's smaller.
I think they got programs that run that. And after you toured there on the staff, didn't you spend some time over in CIA?
Yeah. Jim Plummer had become Undersecretary of the Air Force and was the DNRO. And there became an opening for a military or general at the CIA. And Jim called me in. He said, "I'm sending you over to CIA." And I almost cried. I said, he and I were good friends. Our family were good friends. We'd have dinner together at times. And I just said, "Not Mr. Secretary, Jim, you can't do that to me." He said, "Yes, you're going to have that job, but you won't be in it too long, maybe a year or two at the most." So I got sent over to CIA. It was an awakening to see how really the government worked and how decisions were made and how things were maneuvered and shaped. For instance, we'd go to a meeting and everybody would be at the meeting, and there was somebody sitting in the back. He's from the agency. And at the end, maybe a staffer had an assignment too big. He couldn't. The staffers in Washington were, particularly the White House, were so full. And so the CIA guy would say, "Oh, I'll help you with that." So they would prepare the paper or whatever's required and give it to the staffer. So they had a great deal of influence. I learned from that, and later on, a few years later, it really helped in some key decisions that had to be made.
Yes, sir. Okay. For those of you that maybe consider how we're running, he just hit the mark right on, so we should wind up here about 10 to 3. So.
Yeah, may I make one other comment, Dave?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. While I was there, I didn't wear a uniform one time. I took a low profile, made a lot of friends and a lot of contacts, and did have the opportunity. We had a presidential meeting with the head of the Soviet Union, our president, and the head of the Soviet Union in Vladivostok, and the CIA prepared the papers for him, his briefing and talking papers. And I had an opportunity to work and have input into that, which was kind of exciting to know. But the way the CIA put it together was just absolutely magnificent. I've never seen a job that was so clear, so precise, so beautifully put together. Our president, if he knew nothing about it, could just go through that notebook real quickly and be an expert. And as I understand it, we were much better prepared than the Soviets during that meeting, and it turned out well.
All right, sir. You came back to SP after that assignment there?
Yeah. I got the job, the best job in the world. And in '76, I came back, and Dave Bradburn was here, and Dave was leaving, and so I took over as director of special projects.
What did you find when you took the job?
It was in good shape. The predecessors, Greer and Martin and King and Allen and Bradburn were all great directors. The staff was well staffed. The program managers were good. They knew what was going on. I mean, it was a nice situation to come into. The only thing I found that was, I thought, needed work was the fact that everybody, the whole staff and Program A, SP, was naive. They weren't really aware of what was going on in Washington and what the politics were in Washington. Fortunately, I had just spent that time both on the staff and in the CIA, and had a fantastic understanding, well, not fantastic, but a good understanding of what the situation really was.
And who'd you have for vice directors?
Oh, we had a series of them. When I came in there, Dave Parrish was the vice director. Dave, I knew him before. He was a West Point graduate. He graduated with a year before me, and we were both on the Army football team. We were both ends on the Army football team. So I knew Dave well. He stayed around a while and left, and then I had a series of Ken Cavanis, Auster, Stewart, and Jacobson. So we had several good people. I guess I outlasted him for some reason.
Yeah, 8 years is a long time. What would you say was your management style?
Well, I carried on. When I got there, there were daily staff meetings. I carried on. I thought that was a very good mechanism. We kept them short. If I remember correctly, we tried to have them 8:30 to 9 in the morning. We gave the people a chance to get in. Gave me a chance to get in. I usually got in at 7, got maybe an hour's work done before the staff meeting started. And we'd go around the table, and everybody would have a report. If there was something that was needed a more in-depth review, we'd schedule it later in the day, and we'd go on. So we kept up, and everybody knew the key issues because we went around the table. There were about 15, 20 people at the table. I felt that it was the people that made SP what it was and made it successful. And so we took great care in the staffing and to bring people in. To extraordinary activity. And because we had the good people, we relied on them. Relied very much on the program directors. They ran the program, and they knew more about the program, as a matter of fact, than I did, for sure. So we relied on the program directors to run the programs, but they were responsible to me. And the mode of operation, you don't hide anything. Regardless of what it is, you come up and tell. And boy, don't ever lie. I had one case where somebody got in trouble and decided he wasn't going to tell the whole truth, and that you can't tolerate it in a situation like we had in SP. Incidentally, he happened to be transferred about a month later, but we
just happened to.
Yeah. But you have to take, absolute honesty, and you have to take responsibility. I think that's the hardest thing right now, is that to find somebody to take responsibility. You don't hide. You sit up and you take the responsibility. And as far as SP was concerned, the buck stopped with me. And as far as technically is concerned, I still believe that there are no random failures. There are some failures you can't find out what the problem is, but you can't just simply write off a failure in a piece of equipment that it's random. Particularly when you got $1 billion sitting up there on the pad ready to launch, and you get a glitch. You don't have random failure. You run it down until you find it. Don't always find it, and that's the toughest part. That you have to make that decision. And sometimes you pull it down and you go through months of trying to find it. Other times you suck up your breath and say, you know, go.
Yep.
And that's it. And as far as generally, I don't know how many of you know, but Lee Battle was on the Corona program, and he set up a set of laws, Battle's laws, onto how to run programs. I thought they were very good, and when I ran the 417, I adopted them, and we followed them, and I followed Battle's laws also.
Yes. Oh, okay. Now, personnel's always, as you pointed out, that you got to pay careful attention to staffing. Can you talk some about your personnel situation and how you work it?
Yeah, first of all, we weren't passive. We worked the system. We didn't just put in a request for 2 captains with an engineering background and waited till something came out. We were lucky. We had high priority, so we were able to get people. But as time went on, this began to erode, and other elements of the Air Force, particularly in Systems Command and particularly in Space Division, began to get annoyed with our taking all the good people. So in order to keep it going, and I became even more active. We set up a SCIF, which is a special SCIF. Yeah, in industrial facility, special, anyway, special security. We set up a SCIF at Air Force personnel, and about every 6 months, I'd go down there and give the commander and maybe the vice commander a quick briefing. Maybe I spend an hour with them. And we also, on several name requests, got the DNRO to sign a letter, who was the undersecretary, requesting particular individuals. And our mode of operation normally was, you know, pick good junior officers, company grade officers, possibly a major, and keep them. If they worked well and they were good, we'd let them go back and go to school or go to some other assignment. And then a rank further, let's say they left us as a captain and then they were maybe a major or lieutenant colonel, we'd pick them back. So we picked the good ones back. And that's how we got our people. I took an active role with the Military Personnel Center down there and offered that whenever they were in trouble and needed a general officer to sit on a promotion board, call me, and if I could possibly make it, I would come down. So I sat as president of a couple boards, to major and lieutenant colonel, and on selection boards to flag officers. There's a two-step process, and the last step is to become a general is 3 and 4 stars, but the second step was 1 and 2 stars. So I sat on many of the boards, maybe as many as 3 or 4 a year, and did 2 things. Got familiar with the people and what quality of people were out there, that you were looking at their efficiency reports, and secondly, got to know the people at the Personnel Center. It was a personal relationship. You knew several of them coming back, and they knew that if they needed help and then they needed a general to come and sit on a board, they'd call me, and if I could possibly do it, I did it. So, you know, if I needed a favor, they owed me one.
Yes. And your relationships with Space Division over personnel?
You know, that's tough. We were sitting right with them in the buildings over there, building 110. And they were hurting for people, and they could see us getting very good people. So that caused a friction. And it was understandable, and on occasion we would work out a compromise, but most of the time we just, I was selfish as far as people were concerned, and took the good people. So that didn't help. We had on that issue, we had some conflict with the Space Division.
And technical issues?
Well, first of all technical issues were reported at the morning briefing I was telling you about. And if they were serious, we'd come back and discuss them later. Always the program director, whoever it was, whether it was on Gambit or Hexagon, Les McChristian, Ray Anderson, Lee Roberts, whoever else on some of the other programs. And they were good. These guys were good. Some of the newer programs were more difficult, and we'd have to go to special extremes. One of the extremes that I instituted, and I didn't like to do it, but we did it nevertheless because I wanted to get things done. We instituted a Saturday morning in-depth review, a smear. And if people were having trouble, and they continue to have trouble for a few weeks, they came in on Saturday morning for a 4-hour review. And that nobody wanted to do that, give up their Saturday, or give up all the time to prepare for that review. And they'd go possibly 2 or 3 weeks in a row until they got past the problem, and then they would get off the smear. So that was kind of punitive. It's not a good way of managing, but it did get the job done.
Now, you had the opportunity for a lot of flight ops during your tenure. Did they always go smoothly?
No. I don't think any of the flight ops went smoothly. But fortunately, as I said, we had good people, and they worked the problems. The Hexagon and Gambit, they were hard to fly. If you had a problem, you didn't have much time to react. They only had about two revs if they went unstable. And if they went unstable, you had to get them back into condition and into a safe condition, maybe not the operating condition, but a safe condition in the 2 revs, or they were gone. You just couldn't keep them. And so they were difficult. We also had other problems too, lots of them. Thermal was always a problem, and the thermal issues, we had to work every one of them, be careful and watch the temperatures and the attitudes and how we were operating them. We, as far as the Hexagon and Gambit too, there was a very complex set of procedures in order to control the thermal problems, and we had to operate them. So they weren't putting a satellite up there like maybe some of the communication satellites now, almost forgetting about them. You worked them on every rev. And the problem is you only get to see them occasionally. We had stations all over the world, and we could see them, but on times you would go maybe a half an orbit or an orbit, and you couldn't see them, so you didn't know what was happening. If they happened to start tumbling, then you could lose it before you knew it. Let's see. Oh, let me tell you about one incident that was a incident. Les McChristian had taken over the Gambit program. He also was running the Hex at that time. And we had a problem. in coming out of the first stage, it didn't get all the way out, and when it lit, we burnt off the insulation on part of the bird. So we had no insulation, and we had to fly the bird and keep the thermal under control without the insulation. And we actually, they set up a kind of a rotating, like a barbecue, to try to keep the temperature even as we went around. And then, but when we got over the area of interest where we were going to be taking pictures, we'd stop it and take the pictures and hope that the temperature didn't get out of control, and then start doing it again. So, we flew every one of them. They were, one of them, we had problems on a launch, and I think I'd been up for maybe 20 hours or something like that. And we thought we were going to have problems with the bird. So I got a T-39 and flew from Vandenberg up to Sunnyvale, where we were going on. I was probably up for about another 6 or 7 hours, and we were every rev waiting for it to get the word, or every half a rev. And I finally got there, and I felt like I had nothing. I couldn't help. I couldn't think or anything like that. I was out of it. And so I told Les, who really knew everything about it, and probably much better than I said, Les, you've got it, I've got to leave. And he looked at me and said, you're what? You're going to leave? I said, you got it, you take care of it. And so, and that turned out to be a successful flight.
We talked about on-orbit things. How about launch issues?
Every launch was a breech berth, I'll tell you. None of them, well, I shouldn't say that. There were a few that were easy. But going from things like trains at Vandenberg, we were not supposed, as a train was coming through, it took priority. And here you may have worked on a launch for months, and you get up to the point, and you got a small window, and a train's coming through it. And a couple of times, not to my knowledge at all, but unfortunately, a truck got stuck on the train tracks outside of Vandenberg, and the train had to stop. And one time, we had been waiting for weather, and we were to lose our window. We'd been waiting for a while, and somebody said, it's cleared. We all ran outside and looked, and there was a big opening. So, fire! And we fired up through it. Hey, look, we are only playing around with billion-dollar toys. What else you got?
Let's see, the one launch failure on your watch was...
gosh. Yeah, I had only...
Wheatfield Atlas, right?
Yeah, it was Wheatfield Atlas. I only had one problem. Still, one loss. I had a lot of problems. We lost the one bird. And it was an Atlas that was taken out of a Kansas wheat field and was going to be used to launch a satellite. It was a Navy launch, and I know I'd had discussion with the Navy program director several times on that, saying that I really would like to take the bird back and take it apart, look at it, and then put it back together again and replace what was needed. And he was reluctant to do that. He thought that, well, maybe we can get by with just a complete inspection without taking it all apart, just partially apart. So we launched it. And I was in the control room for launch, and I remember going around talking to people at the various consoles, introducing myself and finding out what their background is, how good they were, and how much experience they had. And the range safety, it was a captain. And he's got the button that blows the bird up. And it was his first launch. And so, it kind of makes you a little nervous. And so the bird was launched, and all of a sudden, we're getting telemetry from it, and it seems to be on course, and everything seems to be going perfectly, but it's slowing down, and it's losing altitude, and it's slowing down, and it's losing altitude. So I ran over to the range safety guy and looked at him, and it kept going down and down. Now, we're out of Vandenberg, and if it happens to turn around and go fast, what have you got to the east? Los Angeles. You know, it could head right towards Los Angeles. Got to be very careful. You blow it real quick in that case. And but it wasn't. It was going right down course, but losing altitude as it went. And finally, I almost was going to push the button, and the guy, new kid, he did a great job, and he finally blew it at the right time. Sent him a nice little note telling him he did a real good, his boss and him, that he did a really good job on it. We found out later that, and I may get this a little bit wrong, but not the gist of it. We had a vernier that went out, and the bird done a 180 flip, so that the engine was in front, and it was birding, and so the bird was going this way, and the engine was slowing it down. So that's why it was getting slower and down and losing altitude and coming down. And from that time on, we did launch an H. I don't remember how many we launched after that. Maybe you do, Dave. But we didn't launch an H without tearing them down and really giving them a good inspection. I know we didn't have another failure. I can't remember.
That was on mine and Larry's, and we built them from scratch.
Yep.
Built the Atlas H's from scratch.
Yep, you rebuilt them.
That's right. We had one captain was the whole SPO for the Atlas H, and 5 successes.
Yep, after that, right.
And so, but we improved all that and went to the shuttle. We want to talk about
Well, we went to the shuttle, being dragged, screaming and crying, and leaving neurals on the street. We didn't want it. Not only SB didn't want it, Space Division didn't want it. That was one time that Dick Henry and I were fighting on the same fight. Well, we never fought. That's wrong. I shouldn't say that. But we were absolutely agreed on that. However, the Secretary of the Air Force and the DNRO was Hans Mark. He was a fantastic, strong shuttle advocate, and he was pushing it, and he came out. And I remember it was a rainy Sunday afternoon, and over in 110 on the 4th floor, a little conference room we had a meeting. Dick and 2 or 3 of his launch people, plus our launch people, and Secretary Hans Mark. And we went through everything. The unmanned, the way we were launching, was more reliable. It was more controllable. It was cheaper. And we went all through that. There was no reason to use the shuttle, and we couldn't convince Hans that we shouldn't use the shuttle. His argument was the country had canceled the breather reactor and had canceled the supersonic transport. And if we canceled the shuttle program, because it would have canceled the shuttle program, if we had canceled the shuttle program, that the country as a whole would lose so much face that it would damage us. So we finally agreed. Both Dick and I agreed that we wouldn't fight it, but that we would be sure to maintain a launch backup, so in case we had a problem. And of course, we did have a problem, and fortunately that the line was open. And a subsequent Undersecretary of the Air Force, who was a DNRO, Pete Aldridge, yeah. Pete, I have to give him credit. He stood up to a lot of pressure and controversy about the fact that he was going to keep that line open. And if he hadn't kept the line open, it would have been years before we could have launched another bird. So Pete got a lot of credit for a lot of intestinal fortitude, standing up to much criticism and kept the line open and saved our butt.
But you did work one shuttle flight, right? You
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, once it was agreed that we were going to use the shuttle. Incidentally, the interesting story about that meeting. It was in the afternoon, Sunday afternoon, raining real hard, and I had a launch that night from Vandenberg. And so how am I going to get up to Vandenberg? No flights, and you can't drive, a 4-hour drive. Jack Bird, who had a private airplane, and we made arrangements that if he flew up there, he could get paid for flying up there. So Jack and I got in this airplane, a little single-engine airplane, and took off, and we got in some of the worst weather ever. Well, I'll tell you, we were up and down, everything. And we did make it to Vandenberg and landed, and we had the launch the next morning, and it all went fine. But I was really worried? No, worse than worried. I was scared, really scared about that flight. And I had flown many, many hours before, but nothing like that. What else have you got?
The shuttle mission.
Oh, yeah. Well, with the shuttle, when we were starting, I felt that if we're going to put our payloads, and our payloads were top secret, and some of them top secret, even beyond top secret, that we had to have somebody up there who understood it and had all the classifications so we could talk in case there was a problem. So I proposed to, again, Hans Mark, and he went along with it, that we create our own mission space engineers, MSEs, and that they would be SP people, and they train, and on our missions, we would fly one of those on every mission, that he knew the bird, and he knew the payload, and everything else. And we selected, we got Hans's approval, and as Secretary of the Air Force, that allowed us to go forward, even though Military Personnel Center, we had to twist their arm a little bit, but we went forward. We picked 11 on the first group, and incidentally, one flew, Gary Payton flew, and he flew on, I got it written here somewhere.
51C.
51C, yeah. And one of the other people on that first group was Mike Hamill, who later became commander here at Space Division. He was one of our MSEs. And the second group we had, we selected 2 or 3 ladies. NASA did not have a female astronaut at that time. When they found out that we had selected 2 ladies to be on our space flight engineers, boy, they had a program real quick. And they hit the papers with it, big headlines and all. Of course, ours was secret, so we couldn't tell anybody, but that pushed them into action real quick.
The structure with 3 programs. Can you talk a little bit about that competition?
We all, I think the 3 programs all respected one another very well. The people in the CIA were tremendously innovative and very capable, and we never had any question about that. And we supported them. After all, we launched all their satellites, and we worked with them, for instance, very closely on the Corona program. But the competition for new programs and new ideas made it appear that we were adversaries. And at least in my mind, we never were. I was very good friends with all the CIA people. And we worked with them. But as far as new programs is concerned, there was a fierce competition, particularly on one program. We had at Special Projects back in the early 70s, or maybe earlier than that, Dave Bradburn had run an experiment, and the experiment was very successful. We actually had 3 launches planned for it. The first one was so successful, we canceled the others and used the launch vehicles for something else. So we had begun work years before. The problem with it was that the data that was taken was analog, and the only way we could process it was analog, and it didn't work. You just didn't get the data processed. So we had to go to digital processing, and so we had this tremendous competition with them over the program. I'm being careful now because the program is still active and it's still classified. But I can talk about some aspects of it. We ended up with the people in Program B being in Washington and doing a lot of briefing and talking around, and it became obvious, and because of my past experience in Washington and the CIA and everything, I knew what was going on. So we started our own campaign, and we're pushing very hard. And however, we were constrained. We were gagged and told not to talk to people about it. And I couldn't let it stand like that because it was obvious what was happening. And I got an appointment with Hans Mark. He was Secretary of the Air Force at that time and still DNRO, and my boss. And we started discussing it. And I remember that the discussion got kind of loud, and we were almost shouting at each other. And I, at one point, figured I was probably going to be fired because I said, you know, Mr. Secretary, I never called him Mr. Secretary except in public. And Mr. Secretary, you claim to be honest and a scientist, and yet you're hiding the truth. You're not letting me go out and talk to anybody. You're gagging us while other people are talking around the city. And he said, you can go out and talk to anybody you want, which was great. I said, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Well, I walked out. As I came out, his secretary looked at me and she said, gee, I was ready to come in and break it up. I thought you were going to hit each other. Anyway, I immediately called, and because I had been in the CIA and I knew the director secretary well, I called her and said, can I get to see Admiral Turner tomorrow? It was late afternoon. And she said, well, he's got a busy schedule tomorrow. He's got a 45-minute lunch that he usually likes to read. Some of the papers come up, and I bring him a sandwich. Can you come up during that time period? I said, absolutely. And so that night, or that afternoon, I went down into our factory. We had opened an office in the basement of the Pentagon just for this particular program and this particular issue. And I sat there and worked it and thought about how am I going to do this. I got a whole briefing together, briefing charts and everything else. I finally said, no, that's not right. You know, I can't do that. And I finally decided I'm not going to take notes or anything. I'm just going to go in and talk to him. Just go in and talk to him. I'd only met Admiral Turner one time at that time. And so the next day I got up there to talk to him. Now, Admiral Turner had just come back from being commander of 6th Fleet. He was a 4-star Navy admiral and an operational one, but he was a classmate of Jimmy Carter's at West Point. I mean, not West Point, at Annapolis. And and they were friends, close friends. So Carter picked him up and gave him the job of director of CIA. So I knew he was a military man, and that was a hope if I could get him on the military. And sure enough, got in there and we started talking. And the 30 minutes that I was scheduled for went up 2 hours. And during the conversation, I knew I thought I had him. I mean, because he began coming off. First talking about military operation, the 6th Fleet and everything else, and how the way we were going to do the program would allow us to support the military, whereas the other way the program was going to be run, it would be very difficult to support the military. And he didn't commit to anything, but at one point he said something about, well, we are looking at it this way, and you're looking at it this way, and I said, Admiral, I work for you. We're on the same team, so we ought to be looking at it the same way. And at that point, I think we sort of got him. It continued. I had good liaison with several of the sinks, and I had been going and briefing them on a periodic basis. Sink SAC every 6 months. I'd go in and I'd have 4 or 5 of the key staff plus the sink SAC there and give them a briefing. And the other sinks occasionally, or at least their DIs, their directors of intelligence. We kept close tabs with them, which in Europe, the Navy, both at LANT and PAC, and Sing South. So we had good arrangements. And what I did was call, I don't remember whether it was call or I wrote him a note, I think I called him, and talked to the DI in each of these things, and told them briefly what the situation was, and gave them a short letter that, do you think you could get the sink to send this letter to the Secretary of Defense? And sure enough, several of them came in. I don't know how many, but I know more than one, at least 2 or 3. And so when the decision was going to be made, it was in the White House, and the President was there, and everybody gave their opinion. And the Secretary of Defense said, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden all my sinks are telling me to go this way. So he came out and he supported it. The SecDef supported it. And because Admiral Turner really was a military man, he said, I can understand the reasoning that he's giving and the support for the military. And Mr. President, if you go along with that, I can live with it. We want it. And the program was built here at SP. And incidentally, it is still going. It's probably the most important program we have.
Yes, sir. Can I take you back to one that we skipped over and I've been promising people you're going to talk about? And that's your relations with Space Division and problems that existed being in the same building over there, 110.
Yeah. It was inevitable, the fact that 2 organizations, both really, one almost all Air Force and the other one all Air Force, with this very close to the same missions and living in such close proximity, would have difficulties. And the difficulties usually festered up over people, because we were getting the better people. And as a matter of fact, some cases, we took people right from Space Division and moved them over. And that never flew very well. That always caused a difficulty. And so Yvonne Getting and I were talking one time, and I was describing, I said, you know, I really don't want this conflict between Space Division and SP. We ought to be working closer together, and on some issues we were, like launch vehicles. They bought our launch vehicles, and they launched it for us, and those we worked very closely together. It was mostly, unlike with the CIA, where we were in competition for programs, here we were mostly in competition for people. A little bit for missions, but mostly for people. And so Yvonne suggested, he said, you know, aerospace could build you a building, and then you would move out. And so I flew it in front of Hans Mark, and he was easy. He was an easy sell. He said, yeah, go ahead. So the building over across the street was built for that purpose. It was our building, built to our specs. Harvey Cohn and his people wrote the security requirements, and you notice they're different on that building than on all the rest. And so we moved out. And when we moved out, it didn't solve the whole problem, but the boil under the belt went away. And so we weren't right there with him. And things got a little better. They did. But that's the story how that building got built. And the way we justified it, well, first of all, we convinced the Secretary of the Air Force to go along with it. So most of the people in the Air Force couldn't object. And we justified it under the basis that we had aerospace people living in Air Force buildings and quarters. So this would just be a quid pro that we would have Air Force people living in aerospace buildings. And it would be the same thing. It would be a balance, 1 for 1. And that's how that building got built.
I'm not going to let you off that easy. When did Dick Henry find out we were moving?
You know, Dave, I can't tell you a date. You know, like September 1st, 1979 or something like that. I can't give you a date like that. But I can say that relationships didn't get real warm, but they got warmer. They thawed a lot. And again, I said the competition was mainly for people, you know, and I can understand that. He had a mission. I mean, Space Division had a mission. They had to do it, and they needed people. And here, all the good people were going over to SP, and not that the people he was getting was bad, but all the key picks were going over the other way. And that caused a problem. And we knew that, but we were selfish.
And you talked some about your discussions with the SINCs, operating commands. Can you talk about your support for the military?
Yeah. I worked the SINCs hard and worked the personnel. We put a skiff up. I guess my background coming out of West Point and then being in the operational Air Force and then putting the station into Vietnam, I felt that space should be supporting the military. And yet, it was not to any large degree. On a strategic sense, it was, but certainly not on a tactical sense. It wasn't supporting it at all. And so, I guess I was pushing for it. Not always to the liking of the people in Washington. there were a lot of people that absolutely didn't agree with me. And we did things like build 2 vans, well, 1 van at first, that would operate directly with satellites and would take information from the satellites and being passed on directly to the fighting forces. It was the R-tip and the I-tip van. There were 2 different models. And we did it with support from the Army Space Program Office. When I had been in the staff, I helped the Army set up a space office. And they were sort of mumbling along, and we had a proposal. We went out and talked to them, and they put up some money, not enough money to do the job. We sort of helped them with the cash problem, and we built a van. And in order to sell it, we were going to take it out to Washington. Now, we were looking for a place, ideal place, with Fort Belvoir. And so it happened to be that not the commander of the base, but the commander of the major unit there, Major General, was a classmate of mine from West Point. And I called him and told him the situation, and could he help us? Well, we got they just turned over backward to help us. And they put us out in the field. They put concertina wire, the bob wire, all around the area, wooden planks for a walkway up to where our van was, and gave us a conference room as a briefing. And we were going to have a demonstration. And the purpose was to be, first of all, every flag officer in Washington we wanted to invite and get as many of them as we could. And all the senior civilians in the Pentagon we wanted to get over and let them see that really space could be used for tactical military purposes. And Hans Mark was the Secretary of the Air Force, and it was night, raining, and the field had turned to mud. It was an ideal combat situation. Lights, mud, and all that. And we picked up Hans in the staff car, and as we were driving out to Belvoir, all the way out, he said, "What a dumb idea it is." He said, "How did you, where did you get the money for it?" And he was kind of threatening me loosely, not real bad, but and we got into the briefing room, and all our guys were in combat fatigues and high boots and really looking military. And the guy who was running it was Bob Mahara. And Bob gave a beautiful briefing. And he took the secretary and walked him in, and had to go through a little bit of mud, and he got some mud on his shoes. And we went up the walkway, and he saw the demonstration. Whereas on the way out, he kept telling me what a dumb idea it is. On the way back, he was just praising it. "Oh, this is great. This is wonderful." He said, "That's what we ought to be doing." And we sold it. And we ended up, every corps got one of those, and we ended up putting some of them on ships too. And I don't know what the situation is now, but I do know that not only strategic military, but tactical military right now has a lot higher priority. Now, my feeling was we always had a national priority, and that was number one. But if you had the capability, why can't you support the soldier in the field? And at that time, it wasn't we were too close yet to the Soviet Union and the strategic confrontation between us and the Soviet Union. People still wanted to face that issue rather than the tactical issue. So.
All right, sir. And get close to winding up here.
Yeah.
What do you think about the current NOL organization?
That's a loaded question.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah. Well, we were small, our office, hard charging, and extremely dedicated. I mean, it was no doubt about it. Let's see, I've got something here that I was going to try to get a view graph, but we didn't have a view graph machine. But let me just show something and people can see it. This was an official document, copy of it, top secret, crossed out, had some other compartment, which is, a handle under some control system, that's crossed out too. The controller is crossed out, that was John Holleran, there's no reason for that. But this is the org chart of the NRO. And it was Dr. McLucas as director, controller John Holleran, staff director, Colonel Bradburn. Program A director, Brigadier General Lou Allen. CIA, Program B, DDS&T was Carl Duckett. Program C was Captain Geiger, and a lot of you might know Bob Geiger. He was here for a while and with us. And Program D was Colonel Hartley, and that was still airplane when we had airplane. This was the organization chart. And it was just as simple as that. For instance, the staff up there, as I said, had no more than about 30 people. And that's it. This is the organization today. And you can see it has mushroomed. Well, the urgency of the mission has somewhat changed. We were facing the Soviet Union. We didn't know what they had in the way of strategic missiles, where they were aimed. Then the Chinese came along. There was an urgency. The president wanted to know. We had the president's full support. That's not the case anymore. It's more of an organization now that is I shouldn't say it's more standard. It has become standardized. That's not saying it's bad, but it sort of fits in with the Pentagon and with organizations, other organizations like DIA, NSA, whatever. They all sort of fit together. Dave pointed out to me a couple weeks ago when we were talking about what we're going to do here, a book that was Barbarians to Bureaucrats. Some of you may have heard about it. It's an interesting book. Incidentally, Dave, I went and bought one immediately because I'd liked the discussion so much.
Well, very good.
Yeah, and in the book, they talk about at the beginning, you have prophets, people who dream about doing something, and then you have barbarians that make it happen, and they're just going to crush. And the barbarians work from crisis to conquer, and that's it. Then after the barbarians, you get to the people who are builders and explorers, and they sort of solidify it and bring it up. And then the focus sort of shifts, and you can come to administrators, and then finally administrators and bureaucrats. All organizations, countries do the same thing. And matter of fact, what about us? And so the organization has done that. It has shifted. That's not bad. It's just the mission is different. The people are different. And I just hope that when I look at this, there are some elements of this that still have, and the only one I can see is maybe one down here, advanced systems, that maybe they still have that kind of ability. Another example, the Manhattan Project. World War II, very close, small group, tremendous priority, tremendous secrecy. And how many years from start to the time they built that atomic bomb? 3? Something like that? Impossible today. And some of our programs were that fast. Impossible today because the whole atmosphere is different. But I suggest that if we had a problem in the country, like we did with the Soviet Union and something else, that we could go back to that and it would work the same way. And the people who are running it are not afraid to take risk. They'll put their, as I did many times, their whole career on the line to get something done over and over again, because you got to do it to get them done. If you're always hiding behind being afraid to take the next step or wanting a committee to make the decision, it's just going to go slower. But it's a sign of the times. It's not a matter of loyalty. They're just as loyal. They're just as good. It's a matter of the urgency and the time.
All right, sir. We're just about spot on the timeline here. And you got any last comments about your?
Oh yeah. From my talking, I think you gathered that the best fun job I had was the 417, the DMSP. We were cowboys, and it was really fun. Didn't have to get anybody to work. Matter of fact, you had to kick them out. They'd go 60 hours, 70 hours a week, and every one of them, and they were all super. However, the best job I ever had was director of SP right here. I couldn't think of a better job anybody could have. I was so blessed and lucky that I did get that job. I did have an opportunity to move a couple times. One time, around the end of the 1979, or in that time period, I was up at Rochester, New York. We had some business up there. You might know where and what would. But I was up in Rochester, and the man who was just about to become Deputy Secretary of Defense, Frank Colucci, was up there. I'd met him before and talked to him, and he had a T-39 that was bringing him back to Andrews. So he said, "Jack, do you want to ride with me?" So I had a chance to talk to him all the way back. And on the way back, he mentioned that the fact that Sam Wilson, who was the director, Lieutenant General, director of DIA, was retiring. And I had worked with Sam when I was in the CIA for a year and a half. And he said, you know, he's retiring, and what would you think about that job? Well, God, you know, I'd been a 2-star Major General for about 2.5 years, and here somebody's offering 3 stars. And I guess I didn't say anything a while, and finally I told him. I said, you know, I think I've got the best job in the Air Force, first of all, and why would I, you know, want to leave it? But I would leave it if ordered to do it. I'll do whatever is going. But I'll tell you, you've got a man over in SAC, Director of Intelligence in SAC, who for about 6 months was acting director of the DIA. His name was Gene Tye. And Gene left. They went over to SAC. He was still Major General, 2 stars. And then Sam Wilson came in. So Gene was sitting there. And I said, he ran the place for 3 or 4 months. And he's really an intelligence man. And I think that you ought to consider him. Well, Gene got the job. And that was good. I've never been sorry about the conversation. I've thought about it a lot. I mean, sure, you're going to think about it a lot. And there was another chance, too. Just as I was retiring, I'd already put the papers in. Of course, they can always be pulled out. It was about January of '83. And I was called to Washington. I went to Washington and talked to some people. Now, I don't know what has happened on this particular activity, but there was a new organization being set up, a new agency, and it was different. It was going to be black, absolutely black, like we were, top secret, but it had to interface with Congress, with State Department, the military, and the White House. It was a different agency doing something else. I don't know, as I said, I don't know what happened to it. It would have been a lieutenant general job. And I was already out of SP. I'd already made that decision. I was retiring from SP. So it was hard. It was a hard choice. It was a hard choice. And I thought about it, and it would have been a very bureaucratic job, probably 60, 70 hours a week, easy. Being black, nobody would know what you're doing, so you're just working in a hole, a black hole. And for some personal reasons, I turned it down. And after all, even if I'd taken it, it would have been a letdown after SP. It would have been a step down, even with a promotion.
Yeah, okay. Now, John Kulpa, where would you like to go from here? Would you like to take questions now, or you want to take a
Well, let's see.
bathroom break? And then come
Well,
back?
I know people have been very, probably bored to death, and we've been here for almost 2 hours. Why don't we just take a few questions and let everybody break?